Hello and welcome to our documentary of the Transcontinental Railroad and how it revolutionized America forever.
The Transcontinental Railroad was built from 1863 to 1869. It spanned from Nebraska to the east coast of California. The track was 1,868 miles long.
The Transcontinental Railroad was made of cast iron. It costed $60 million to build. The company that made it was the CPRU, short for Central Pacific Railroad Union. The owners of the company were known as the Big Four. They were Charles Crocker, Mark Hopkins, Leland Stanford, and Collis Potter Huntington.
The Transcontinental Railroad was a major help to the transportation of goods, and it helped us get stuff faster. It was also a lot more efficient and saved us a lot of time and money.
The reason that the Transcontinental Railroad was built was 1. To connect the eastern and western parts of the U.S. 2. It helped open some non-accessible locations that we would have not yet discovered. And 3. It would help with trade and transportation of people and goods such as food and supplies.
The Transcontinental Railroad would allow for settlements in the West, new markets for Eastern manufacturers, and it would relieve some stress on overcrowded Eastern cities. People believed that Americans should control the whole continent of the U.S. in 1845.
On December 28, 1866, a town on the west side of the mountains, Cisco, California, experienced its largest snowfall in 10 years. There was a huge avalanche that killed up to 100 men during its course. In total, there was 1,200 deaths due to its harsh conditions while building the Transcontinental Railroad. There was a total of 44 snowstorms during the construction.
20,000 Chinese workers contributed to build the Transcontinental Railroad. Railroad construction required tons of resources. Each mile of track required 100 tons of steel rail, 2,500 ties, and 2 to 3 tons of metal pieces used to join individual track. So that means it took 177,600 tons of steel to build the Transcontinental Railroad.
In addition to transporting Western food crops and raw materials to the East Coast, markets and manufactured goods from East Coast cities to the West Coast. The railroad also facilitated international trade.
On May 10, 1869, the last rail was laid, and the Golden Spike ceremony at Promontory Point, Utah. Total miles of track that were laid were 1,776, 690 miles by the Central Pacific Railroad Union, and 1,086 by the Union Pacific Railroad Company. The Central Pacific Railroad blasted a total of 15 tunnels through the Sierra Nevada mountains. Now we will be showing you a video of the Transcontinental Railroad and how the Chinese population contributed to the building and constructing.
The gold rush had brought thousands from China to California in the 1850s. When construction of the railroad began in 1863, the Chinese were not the first choice to work in it.
There was belief that they were either temperamentally or physically unfit for railroad work, but workers they hired on did very, very well for them. They were very, very pleased. Ultimately, they hired up to 20,000 workers.
Not only was the Chinese labor force plentiful, the workers were paid less than whites doing the same job. And the work was hard. They took on the most challenging portion of the Transcontinental Railroad, California's Granite Mountain Range, the Sierra Nevada.
15 tunnels had to be blasted, carved out through the Sierra Nevada. The Chinese carved out those 15 tunnels, the longest one being over 1,600 feet in length, and it took more than 2 years using only hand tools and black powder.
In the newspapers of the day, Chang found recognition for the contribution the Chinese rail workers were making to a growing nation.
To read the history,
Jeff Lee, a retired dentist from San Jose, California, is inspired by the hard work his great-grandfather did.
They don't come over as Hulk, right? They come over as pretty much me, right? And they learn to adapt to what they had to do physically, mentally, emotionally, as individuals and as groups.
And Lee is proud of where these tracks have taken his family.
The Transcontinental Railroad was a huge part in American history. It helped develop the young USA in its infancy. And if the first Transcontinental Railroad wasn't built, I don't think the way we are transported and the way our goods are transported would be the same today without the first Transcontinental Railroad. It opened up America's trading and shipping range of goods, such as food. This also saved America a lot of money. By having faster and more efficient transportation, America was able to have more food items stay in good condition, which means more profit made off of those things. It also made traveling time from the east to west coast drop dramatically. It would take 4.5 months to travel by horseback, but by the railroad it took a little over 3 days.
In addition to transporting Western food crops and raw materials to the East Coast, markets and manufactured goods from East Coast cities to the West Coast. The railroad also facilitated international trade.
The U.S. offered the job to two companies. They both took the job, hoping to be the ones to get the money. The companies were the Central Pacific Railroad Union and the Union Pacific Railroad Company. The Central Pacific Railroad Company had over 20,000 Chinese workers working in the hardest part of California's Nevada mountain range. There was a total of 15 holes blown through the mountains. The Chinese also got paid less than the whites when they were doing the same exact work, and maybe even harder work. The working conditions were very brutal for the workers. Temperatures would get as high as 100 degrees and as low as 40 degrees in the harsh winters. While building the railroad, there were a total of 1,200 deaths. On a good day of work, they could lay down 25,800 railroad ties, also known as rails. And also on a good day, they could lay down 28,160 spikes. The work was very difficult, and you were always bent over, so a lot of workers had to leave the job because of their back pain and the condition of their back.
On May 10, 1869, a golden spike was driven at the promontory, Utah, signaling the completion of the first transcontinental railroad in the United States. The Transcontinental Railroad had been a dream for people living in the American West.
The golden spike was a sign of completion of the first ever transcontinental railroad.